Hi everyone, welcome back. This video is going to be a little bit different. I was watching one of my favorite shows, Dateline, this weekend, and there was an interview with Lori Vallow, the Doomsday Mom. And so many of her behaviors and actions and story reminded me of behaviors we have seen in Meghan Markle. So, what I wanted to do in this video is talk about the case, just a quick summary. And I'm going to talk about the things that I find similar between the two. I'm going to cross post this on my true crime channel as well. So you will be seeing this video on revealing the narc and on revealing the crime. But before we begin, here's the intro. Welcome to Revealing the Narc. Join me as I highlight narcissistic traits in celebrities and public figures. Everything here is in my opinion and not professional advice. If you enjoy the analysis, please like and subscribe. Okay, guys, I'm going to tell you about the two big things that caught my eye that during that interview that reminded me of Meghan immediately. The first is that the interviewer, Keith Morrison, he is one of my favorites. If you've never seen an episode of Dateline with him, like, highly recommend. He's a great storyteller. He's just so interesting. He's seriously the best. Anyways, so Lori Vallow married a man named Chad Daybell. So her name is Lori Vallow Daybell. But Keith Morrison asks her, people call you Lori Vallow, even though you're Lori Vallow Daybell. How do you feel about that? And she said, well, I'm Lori Daybell. Actually, let me tell you exactly what she said, because I made a note of it and I'm not reading it exactly as she said. Okay, so what happened is Keith says that everyone calls her Lori Vallow and asked if it bothered her. And she said, no, it doesn't bother me, but I'm Lori Daybell. This immediately was a flashback to Meghan and With Love Meghan when Mindy Kaling called Meghan Markle, and Meghan really snapped and said, well, I'm Meghan Sussex. The interesting thing though, so even though the response was the same and we're seeing both of these things being aired around the same week, that Lori Daybell didn't seem angry, even though Meghan was angry or seemed angry. The second thing I noticed is that Lori Vallow Daybell has a trial coming up very soon. And I didn't realize this, but she is representing herself. There's something to say about people that are not lawyers that represent themselves in these serious types of crimes. There have been a few cases where the defendant has represented themselves, and one that comes to mind immediately is Ted Bundy in 1979. He was one of the most infamous serial you-know-whats in U.S. history. Bundy was known for his charm and manipulative nature. He believed he was the smartest in the courtroom. He cross-examined witnesses, including a police officer who had arrested him. He flirted with women in the audience. And despite this confidence, he was still found guilty. But the interesting thing here is this need for control, need for controlling the narrative, and almost this incredibly delusional feeling of grandeur and having power over people. And I see this in Lori Vallow, and I see this in Meghan as well. What really, really caught my eye is that Meghan does not take advice from anybody. We know that there's rapid turnover of her staff. It seems from what we hear through journals and other people that have been with her and in articles and everything, that Meghan doesn't listen to people's advice. She's surrounded by yes people. She fires people that don't agree with her. And I feel like she's trying to be a one-woman show. She does her PR, she does her advertising, she does all of that on her own. So this was just the second thing that I was like, oh my gosh, I see some similarities between these two, Meghan and Lori. So let's do a quick summary about Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow is known as the Doomsday Mom, and she is a convicted M-word. She's infamous for her involvement in the passing of her two children, Tylee, who was 16, and JJ, who was 7, as well as the suspicious passing of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, and her alleged role in the death of her new husband's ex-wife, Tammy Daybell. Lori Vallow's story is like that of any ordinary suburban mother, But beneath the surface, darkness was growing. She was once married to Charles Vallow. It was her fourth marriage, a successful businessman who adored her. Together, they were raising two children, Tylee, Lori's daughter from a previous marriage, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, a little boy with autism whom they adopted. J.J. was Charles's biological nephew, and the couple took him in when his birth parents couldn't care for him. For years, they appeared to be a happy, stable family, but Lori's increasing obsession with doomsday prophecies and extremist religious beliefs began to unravel everything. By 2018, Lori had become enamored with Chad Daybell, a self-proclaimed prophet and author of apocalyptic novels. Chad had preached that the end of the world was imminent and that certain people were light while others were dark or even possessed by demonic spirits. Lori became convinced that she had a divine mission and that her own husband was an obstacle. Charles noticed the change in his wife and grew deeply concerned. He filed for divorce in early 2019, telling authorities that Lori had threatened to injure him, calling herself a translated being who no longer needed to eat and was preparing for the end times. But before he could finalize the divorce, Charles was shot by Lori's brother Alex in July 2019 and he passed. Alex claimed that it was self-defense, saying Charles had attacked him, but many believe it was premeditated. In a disturbing twist, just days before he passed, Charles had changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his sister Kay, JJ's biological grandmother. Lori, expecting to inherit the money, was furious when she found out she had been cut off. With Charles out of the picture, Lori quickly moved on. She relocated to Rexburg, Idaho with Tylee, JJ, and Alex. This is the same city that Chad lived in. He was still married to his wife Tammy, who had no idea what was coming. In September 2019, just weeks after arriving in Idaho, both Tylee and JJ vanished. Tylee was last seen on September 8 at Yellowstone National Park, and JJ disappeared on September 23rd. When concerned family members asked about the children, Lori offered bizarre excuses, claiming JJ was with friends or that Tylee was away at school. But as suspicion mounted, Lori and Chad fled to Hawaii, leaving everyone to wonder where the children were. Then tragedy struck again. In October 2019, Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, suddenly passed in her sleep. Just 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori married on a beach in Hawaii, seemingly without a care in the world. When authorities began investigating Tammy's suspicious passing and the whereabouts of Lori's children, the wall started closing in. Lori was arrested in February 2020 for failing to produce her kids, and Chad was taken into custody months later. The horrifying truth was finally revealed in June 2020, when JJ and Tylee's remains were discovered on Chad's property. There's a lot of information that I'm not presenting here. I just wanted to give you a quick run through of the case. Lori Vallow was convicted of first-degree M-word for the passing of her two children and conspiracy to commit the M-word in Tammy Daybell's passing. Lori was sentenced to life in prison without parole in July 2023. The interesting thing is that Lori has a trial coming up in Arizona on March 31st. This trial pertains to charges of conspiracy to commit the M-word in the passing of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, and the attempted M-word of her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. This is the trial that Lori has chosen to represent herself. On January 10th, 2025, she criticized the prosecution and requested access to specific evidence, asserting her due process rights. She also filed a motion to dismiss her Arizona case, citing a lack of a speedy trial. The judge denied this motion, stating that previous trial delays were due to extraordinary circumstances and were necessary for the interests of justice. So there's a pre-trial hearing scheduled for March 18th, and the actual trial date is set for March 31st. Let's start comparing these two and look at the traits of narcissism that they both display. The first one we'll talk about is the narcissistic need for control. Lori insists on representing herself despite having no legal experience. This is classic narcissistic overconfidence. Megan often tries to control every narrative about her life, from PR to interviews, and she refuses expert advice. Both women reject professional help because they believe they are the smartest person in the room. Going back to Lori Vallow's decision of representing herself, this is not legal strategy. This is about control. She believes she is smarter than everyone, including professionals trained in the field. Despite facing overwhelming charges, she rejects her lawyers because she thought she could manipulate the system and the jury better than legal experts. She sees herself as above the law, believing that her charm and supposed divine status could outmatch actual legal arguments. Even when she wasn't allowed to self represent, she tried to dominate the courtroom with bizarre behaviors such as smirking, refusing to take responsibility, and portraying herself as a victim. Megan displays a similar need for control, but in the media world rather than in a courtroom. She refuses to let anyone else control the narrative about her, often overriding PR experts and making damaging decisions. Instead of working with experienced professionals, she dictates her own PR, and she tries to control how she is perceived, even when reality contradicts her version of events. She rejects advice from seasoned industry professionals, assuming she knows better, just as Lori rejected legal counsel. Megan demands total narrative control, often rewriting history to suit her needs. For example, Megan's letter to Congress demanding paid leave for pregnancy was written without consulting experts or policymakers and was seen as amateurish and self serving. She believes her name alone was enough to push legislation forward. Both women demonstrate the narcissist's obsession with control, believing they can bend reality to their will, even in situations where expertise is required. The second trait I want to talk about is grandiosity and delusions of superiority, which is something that narcissists experience. Let's start with Lori Vallow. She believed she was a divine being chosen to fulfill a greater mission. She and Chad Daybell claimed to be exalted leaders preparing for the end of the world. She saw herself as above the law, dismissing the overwhelming evidence against her as if she was untouchable. Her smirking, laughing, and carefree demeanor in court showed zero concern for the charges against her, as if she was too important to face consequences. She tried to outsmart the entire legal system, choosing to represent herself despite having no legal training, because she truly believes she is more capable than her own defense attorneys. Even after being convicted, she remains delusional, saying her children were happy and busy in heaven instead of acknowledging the horrific reality of what happened. Her refusal to accept reality is a textbook example of grandiosity and self delusion. Megan also has this similar grandiosity. She believes that she is an elite humanitarian, an activist, a Hollywood icon, despite having no real accomplishments in these areas beyond self promotion. She truly believes she is on the same level as global icons like Nelson Mandela and Princess Diana, even comparing her wedding to Mandela's release from prison, a claim that's so absurd that Mandela's family had to correct her. Megan overestimates her influence in politics, assuming that one letter to Congress about paid leave would change U.S. legislation because of her name alone. She behaves as if she is Hollywood royalty, despite being rejected by the industry. She expected A-listers to rally behind her, only to be ignored. Megan's failed ventures, Spotify, Netflix, her lifestyle blog rebrand, they prove that she is not the powerhouse she thinks she is, yet she refuses to acknowledge any mistakes and always blames others. Like Lori, Megan rewrites history to fit her fantasy, portraying herself as the ultimate underdog, victim, and feminist icon, even when the facts contradict her claims. Grandiosity is extremely dangerous. Both Lori and Megan's delusions of superiority have caused them to make irrational decisions that ultimately led to their own downfall. Lori's belief in her own brilliance and divine status made her think that she could outmaneuver the legal system. She lost everything and is now serving a life sentence. Meghan's belief that she is untouchable and beloved has led her to alienate the royal family, Hollywood, and even her own fans. Narcissists never see their own destruction coming because their grandiosity blinds them to reality. Both women are perfect case studies in how delusion of superiority eventually backfires. On to a lack of empathy and manipulative tactics. Both Lori and Megan exhibit a deep absence of empathy, especially when their actions hurt those close to them. She showed no grief for her children's passing. Even when her children were missing, she smiled, vacationed in Hawaii, and refused to answer questions about their whereabouts. Even after they were found, she showed no remorse or sorrow. Instead, she smirked in court and acted like she was the victim. She claimed her children were happy in heaven rather than acknowledging the horror of what happened to them. She manipulates the people around her. She convinced her brother Alex to go after her husband, Charles Vallow, by claiming Charles was possessed. She manipulated Chad Daybell into believing she was some kind of divine figure, ensuring he would help cover up her crimes. She also gaslit and lied to law enforcement, refusing to help find her kids while putting on a fake smiling front. During her trial, she behaved as though it was an inconvenience, rolling her eyes and smirking while discussing the passing of her own children. She tried to manipulate the jury by playing the role of a misunderstood victim rather than taking any accountability. While Megan's actions aren't criminal like Lori's, she exhibits the same calculated lack of empathy, especially when it comes to discarding people, rewriting history, and weaponizing victimhood for personal gain. She has no remorse for destroying relationships. She cut off her own father despite him being hospitalized before her wedding. Instead of showing concern, she mocked him in private messages and later painted herself as the victim. She isolated Harry from his family by convincing him that the family was toxic while positioning herself as his sole source of truth and safety. We also know she has left a trail of people that she's ghosted in her entire life, including Nanaki Pretty and Gina Nelthorpe Cowan, and there's just so many more. She manipulates the media and public. She cried racism against the royal family, but when pressed for details in Oprah's interview, she contradicted herself multiple times. She claimed she was a victim of press intrusion, yet she constantly sought media attention through leaks, staged pep walks, and PR stunts. She said she knew nothing about the royals, yet we know that she studied them extensively. She has cold, emotionless behavior towards others. She fakes tears, she forces affection, and she has insincere body language, often giving away her lack of true empathy. So the narcissistic parallel between these two is using people and then discarding them. Lori used her husband, Chad Daybell, her brother, Alex Cox, and others to eliminate, in quotation marks, obstacles that stood in her way. Meghan used Harry, the royal family, and friends and staff to advance her career, and then she discarded them. They both have a pattern of narcissistic manipulation. They start off with charm and love bombing. Lori did that with Chad, and Meghan did that with Harry. They control and isolate. They cut off their victims from outside influences. Lori discarded her own husband, kids, and anyone in her way, and Meghan did the same with family, friends, staff, and Harry's relatives. This lack of empathy is dangerous. Lori's narcissistic lack of empathy led to the M word, and Megan's narcissistic lack of empathy has led her to destroy lives, careers, and reputations. I want to reiterate, while Megan's actions aren't criminal, they follow the same pattern of manipulation, exploitation, and emotional detachment seen in the most extreme cases of narcissism. The fourth narcissistic characteristic I want to talk about is playing the victim while causing destruction. One of the most defining traits of narcissists is their ability to wreak havoc on people's lives while simultaneously claiming to be the victim. They lie, manipulate, and destroy relationships, yet when consequences catch up with them, they flip the script. Suddenly, they're the ones that have been wronged. Both Lori and Meghan are masters of this tactic. They damage the people around them, whether through violence or manipulation, but instead of taking accountability, they portray themselves as misunderstood, oppressed, or persecuted figures. Laurie has pretended to be the wronged mother. She lied repeatedly about the whereabouts of her missing children while vacationing with Chad in Hawaii. Even after the kids were discovered, she refused to acknowledge her role and instead claimed they were safe and happy in heaven. In court, she acted like she was being unfairly targeted instead of a mother responsible for the passing of her children. Her husband, Charles Vallow, had tried to warn people about her erratic behavior, and she painted him as a villain and manipulated her brother into committing what led to his passing. She called her own children zombies as an excuse to justify their passing. She framed herself as a woman of God, being persecuted rather than a criminal on trial. She showed no emotion or remorse during the trial. She smiled, laughed, and rolled her eyes while grieving family members testified. She made bizarre claims about communicating with her deceased children as if that made up for what she had done. The bottom line is, Lori left a trail of people passing and destruction, but acted like she was a misunderstood victim of fate rather than the M word. So Megan's behavior follows the same pattern, causing chaos in people's lives and then rewriting history to make herself look like the victim. She claims the royal family oppressed her despite being given a lavish wedding, multiple homes, and a global platform. She smeared Catherine, Princess of Wales, in the Oprah interview, and when Catherine didn't respond, she played the victim and claimed the press was bullying her. She cried about being silenced while giving endless interviews and podcast episodes where she was the only one talking. When Spotify cut ties with her, she and Harry claimed the industry had a structural bias against them. When Hollywood rejected her, she blamed racism and sexism rather than admitting that she lacks talent and likability. When her Netflix show underperformed, it was suddenly because the media was against her. She uses Harry as a pawn to strengthen her victim narrative. She has convinced Harry to cut off his family, framing it as protecting him from abuse. She played the I rescued Harry card, despite the fact that his life was objectively better before meeting her, in my opinion. Bottom line, Meghan destroys relationships, careers, and reputation, but always positions herself as the helpless victim of racism, oppression, or misogyny, never taking responsibility. The narcissistic parallel between these two is using victimhood as a defense mechanism. This tactic works for narcissists because they thrive on making themselves the center of attention. Playing the victim allows them to avoid responsibility. If they're the victim, they can't be the villain. It allows them to manipulate others. People feel sorry for them and come to their defense. It also allows them to control the narrative. If they frame themselves as being wronged, others focus on that instead of the destruction that they've caused. It also leads to them staying relevant. Sympathy keeps them in the spotlight. But the victim mask always slips. Lori's fell apart in court. Once the evidence piled up, no one bought her innocence. And Meghan's act is falling apart in Hollywood. People are tired of the victim narrative and are seeing through her contradictions. Eventually, even the most manipulative narcissists run out of people to fool. Another classic narcissistic trait we are seeing being shared between Meghan and Lori is this constant rewriting of history and gaslighting. Narcissists never take responsibility for their actions, so when the reality doesn't suit them, they simply change the story. This is often accompanied by gaslighting, where they try to convince others and even themselves that their version of events is the only truth, despite clear evidence to the contrary. Both Lori and Meghan have engaged in rewriting history and gaslighting to manipulate public perception, avoid accountability, and craft a self-serving narrative. Lori's rewriting of history was extreme. She reframed the M word as a divine mission and gaslit those around her into believing it. She rewrote her children's fate. When Tylee and JJ disappeared, she refused to acknowledge that they were missing, instead, making up contradictory stories about where they were. After they were found in Chad Daybell's backyard, Lori claimed they were safe and happy in heaven, as if this excused what had happened. She later spoke of them in the present tense, as if she was still a devoted mother, completely ignoring the reality of their passing. She gaslit law enforcement and family. When her late husband, Charles Vallow, tried to warn police that Lori was mentally unstable and dangerous, she dismissed him as crazy and painted herself as the victim. After Charles was injured by her brother and passed, she acted like it was completely normal, even throwing a pool party later that same day. She lied to police, family, and friends about her children's safety, manipulating people into believing she was being unfairly attacked. Lori quickly moved on and married Chad Daybell, even though his wife had just passed under mysterious circumstances. She and Chad claimed their previous spouses were dark spirits who needed to be removed, rewriting history to justify their passing. Even in court, she framed her marriage as a love story, ignoring the trail of destruction that led to it. The bottom line here is Lori rewrote reality to paint herself as a holy warrior rather than a cold blooded M word, and she gaslit everyone around her into believing it. And Megan, we've seen it. She's constantly changing her story. She frequently contradicts herself, proving that the truth is irrelevant to her as long as she controls the narrative. She rewrote her experience within the royal family. She claims she knew nothing about them before meeting Harry, but we know that's not true based on people that she grew up with. She said that she and Harry had a private wedding before the public one, but the Archbishop of Canterbury debunked that lie. She claimed she was forced into silence by the royals, yet she gave multiple interviews, wrote a letter to Congress, and called the paparazzi herself. She gaslit the public about her family. She said she grew up poor despite attending private schools, traveling frequently, and living in a wealthy neighborhood. She painted her father as a villain despite letters showing she once adored him and he paid for her education and lifestyle. She claimed she was an only child and had no relationship with her half siblings, despite old photos proving otherwise. She's rewritten her work history. She claims she was a feminist activist at age 11, writing letters to companies about sexism, but no one had heard this story until she became famous. The famous dish soap story we've all heard multiple times. She's framed herself as a self made success despite getting acting roles through connections, including her father. The bottom line is, Megan constantly rewrites her history to fit whatever narrative suits her at the moment, even when there is clear evidence contradicting her. Essentially, for both Lori and Megan, when the truth doesn't fit, they changed it. Both Lori and Megan demonstrate another narcissistic trait of overestimating their own intelligence. And this, I love the next section we're going to talk about. So, one of the most consistent traits of narcissists is their inflated sense of intelligence and competence, even in areas where they have little to no expertise. They believe they are the smartest person in the room, often dismissing real experts, ignoring advice, and making reckless decisions because they genuinely think they know better. Both of them have demonstrated extreme overconfidence in their intelligence, leading to public humiliation, disastrous choices, and ultimately their own downfall. Lori believed that she could outsmart the legal system, and this was evident in the way she interacted with law enforcement and manipulated those around her, ultimately trying to outplay the court system. When police questioned her about her missing children, Lori laughed, dodged questions, and acted as if she was untouchable, as if her charm alone would fool authorities. She gave conflicting stories about where her kids were, thinking she could lie her way out of it, but her inconsistencies only made her more suspicious. She has zero legal experience, but she is going to defend herself thinking that she's better than trained attorneys. Narcissists hate being told what to do, so she dismissed professional legal advice, thinking she could outtalk a judge and jury, a spectacular miscalculation. Her lack of legal knowledge, I believe, is going to show immediately. She is in way over her head. The bottom line, I believe Lori overestimates her intelligence. She dismisses expert advice and she believes she can outmaneuver the legal system, but I don't think that this is possible. Megan's overestimation of her own intelligence is one of the biggest reasons for her repeated failures. She ignores experts, she overplays her hand, and constantly embarrasses herself because she believes she is always the smartest person in the room. She ignored palace advisors, thinking she knew better. The royal family would try so many times to assign experienced advisors to her, but she rejected their advice and one time even told the queen that she has Harry to teach her. Instead of following protocols that have been perfected over centuries, she demanded her own way, causing unnecessary scandals. She assumed she was rewriting the royal rulebook, but instead, she alienated herself and Harry from the monarchy. She's overplayed her hand in Hollywood. Meghan thought she was an A-list actress, despite only having minor roles in TV shows. She left the royal family assuming Hollywood would embrace her, but she has failed spectacularly. Instead of admitting that she has miscalculated, she blames racism, sexism, media bias, and so many others, refusing her own arrogance and lack of talent are the real problem. She believes she could manipulate the press, but journalists keep exposing her lies and contradictions. The bottom line is Meghan thinks she's a brilliant strategist, a PR genius, and an industry disruptor, but her arrogance has caused one fail after another. The overconfidence that Lori and Meghan have has led to failure. Both of them mistake charm for intelligence. They believe that because they've manipulated people before, they can do it forever. They reject expert advice. They see themselves as superior, so they don't trust professionals who know better. They double down when caught. Even when exposed, they refuse to admit they were wrong, often making things worse. They are disconnected from reality. Their delusions make them think they are always one step ahead, even when they are actually falling behind. Eventually, narcissists' overestimation of their intelligence leads them to self destruct because they don't realize when the game is up. I want to end this video talking about the public's reaction to both of their arrogance. One of the inevitable consequences of narcissistic behavior is that over time, people wake up to the lies, manipulation, and arrogance. Narcissists like Lori Vallow and Meghan Markle start off with a carefully curated image, but as the truth unravels, the public begins to reject them. I want to mention that I am not a therapist, but the behaviors I see between Meghan and Lori are similar, and they are part of the cluster B personality types that includes narcissists. So, although I'm using the term narcissist to describe them, there may be something else within that cluster that may define them better. Okay, getting back to the topic, Lori's downfall was swift and severe once people realized who she really was. Meghan, on the other hand, has experienced a slow but steady decline as people lose patience with her contradictions and self pitying narratives. Lori Vallow went from being a devoted mother to a national disgrace. At first, many people believed her lies. She presented herself as a loving, church going mother who was simply being harassed by authorities, and she was being unfairly judged. Early supporters believed that she was being targeted. When she was first arrested, some believed that she was innocent, assuming she was just a grieving mother who was unfairly accused. Even her closest family members were manipulated into thinking she was being victimized. As details emerged, her refusal to say where her kids were, her vacationing in Hawaii, her smug behavior in court, people started seeing through the act. The discovery of Tylee and JJ's remains was the breaking point. The nation collectively realized this woman is not a victim, she's a monster. Her cold, remorseless demeanor in court only confirmed her guilt in the public's eyes. Once Lori's narcissistic facade was shattered, she went from being an object of intrigue to one of disgust. Today, she is seen as a callous, manipulative M-word who used her charm and lies to destroy lives. The bottom line is the public initially gave Lori the benefit of the doubt, but when the truth surfaced, they turned on her completely, and she became a symbol of pure evil. Meghan's decline has been less dramatic than Lori's, but follows the same pattern, a slow unraveling of the carefully crafted facade, leading to public backlash, mockery, and rejection. In the beginning, Meghan was widely adored, a Hollywood actress who found love with a prince. The royal wedding was a global event, and many saw her as a breath of fresh air for the monarchy. But the public started questioning her when her behavior began changing, and I think one of the most important turning points, and I think the biggest turning point was the Oprah interview. People initially believed her racism accusations, but she contradicted herself and many began to question her credibility. The Netflix documentary and Harry's Harry's autobiography Spare. The Netflix documentary and Harry's autobiography Spare further damaged their reputation as it became clear that they are obsessed with victimhood, that they hate the press, and they can't stop giving interviews, that they were deliberately attacking the royal family for financial gain. We've seen over the last couple of years that Hollywood's elites have distanced themselves. Oprah, Beyonce, and others have stopped associating with her. The British public overwhelmingly the British public overwhelmingly the British public overwhelmingly rejected her, with approval ratings dropping to all-time lows. Even in the US, where she once had support, people have grown tired of her whining and contradictions. Her final reputation as of now, in my opinion, is that she is a laughingstock and a social climber. Meghan isn't feared or respected. She is mocked. Late night hosts, media personalities, and social media users now openly ridicule her, which would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Her Hollywood comeback attempts keep failing. The bottom line is, Meghan started out as a beloved public figure, but through her own arrogance, contradictions, and victim complex, she has turned into a punchline. Narcissists always lose public favor. They push too far. Their arrogance leads them to overplay their hand. Their lies catch up with them. People eventually notice the contradictions. They refuse to adapt. Instead of owning mistakes, they double down and make things worse. And people get tired of the drama. At some point, constant victimhood and manipulation stop working. Narcissists can't fool people forever. Lori believed she could maintain her innocent act forever, but the truth was too horrific to hide. Meghan believed she could manipulate the public indefinitely, but her lies and contradictions have caught up with her. Eventually, narcissists run out of people to fool, and once the public turns on them, there's no coming back. So I'm interested to know in what you all think about this. Please leave comments. I would love to hear from you. Are there other people that you would like me to compare Meghan to? This was a very fascinating topic to bring up, I think, and it really merges two of my interests. So let me know in the comment. If this was interesting to you, please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you will know every time I drop a video. Please also go and check out my true crime page. It's called Revealing the Crime, and I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video. I'm starting to upload on it, but it takes time for me to do the research to create these videos, and hopefully I'll get better at it and be able to post a lot more on there soon. I want to thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye, everyone.